Hello and welcome to the 01581 Let's Talk. Today, our town manager provides us an update of two high-interest topics, and we'll talk with a Westborough High School graduate, Connor Schoen, about the cycle of young adult homelessness and what his company, Breaktime, is doing to break that cycle. Join us. Kristi, welcome back.
Thank you.
Excellent. So a couple of interesting updates you want to give to our audience?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what's going on?
So I think one thing that we've been talking a lot about is our trash program and sort of what our waste management program will look like in the future, given what we've heard from Harvey's about the fact that we'll no longer be using the transfer station the way that we currently do, effective July 1st, 2024.
Right.
So we have a Waste Management Exploratory Committee, which we've talked a lot about, and they are coming to the Select Board on Tuesday night to give their initial recommendations. So
Sure.
I think really excited to hear from them on the work that they've done and the data that they've been gathering, of which you're a member,
Right.
so you know all
Yes.
about that.
Yes, I do. And that's Tuesday, May 9th,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
So really important conversation, lots of interest. There's always a lot of interest in the transfer station. It's a popular place for not just, getting rid of things, but for, people seeing each other and so on and so forth. But that relationship is coming to an end, and the committee has been charged by the Select Board to come up with recommendations and, sort of an approach to how we deal with this. And I'm looking forward to that presentation to the board. I think we've got a great approach. We won't do a reveal here,
Right.
but it is. It's important, and it's also in the context of the state's initiative to reduce waste overall.
Right.
So it's a multi-layered approach. So waste management and the senior needs assessment.
That's right. So by the end of this week, we expect to have the final report of the senior needs assessment, which we've been working on for several months. That data for the report was gathered through surveys, through focus groups, through one-on-one interviews. So really a lot of opportunity for folks to participate in this, and not just seniors. I mean, anyone could have filled out the survey.
Right. So we have just over 4,600 60-plus seniors living in our community and calling Westborough home. We had a response rate based on that number of greater than 30%, which is fantastic.
Yep.
And to your point, so the survey was mailed home to all of those individuals, those households of 60 plus, but anyone could participate, which is great because, if you're not a senior today, you might be tomorrow, and I'm getting there quickly. So good. So what's the next step then?
So we're going to do sort of a preliminary reveal of some of the major themes at the Select Board meeting on Tuesday. Really just wanting to introduce kind of what we've learned from the report, and then also just making sure folks know that on May 16th at 6 o'clock at the Senior Center, we'll actually have UMass Boston Department of Gerontology, who supported us and really did all of that work.
Yep.
Present their final findings.
Excellent.
So everyone's welcome to that. Hopefully we'll have a lot of people attending.
And so the report will actually be available when and how?
So we expect to put the report on the website tomorrow morning.
Okay.
And we will blast that out as much as possible.
Sure.
We will also print some of the executive summaries available in the town buildings, and then certainly willing to print full copies of the report for anyone who's asking. So definitely can get some
Sure.
of those hard copies at the Senior Center.
Yeah, and I know when we did our strategic plan and the results of that, there were copies available at the library. So typically they're placed throughout the town once they're available. That's really exciting. So for our audience and those watching, May 9th, the Select Board meeting, the Senior Needs Assessment and Waste Management will be discussed, and May 16th, you can attend the Senior Center presentation at the Senior Center on May 16th at 6 p.m. Our friends at Westborough TV will also be covering the event, so you can watch it there as well.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Kristi. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, and welcome back to the 01581. One of the statistics I found really interesting as I prepared for our guest today is that 1 in 10 young adults ages 18 to 24 will at some point find themselves homeless in any given year, and that's in the United States. I found that statistic, frankly, staggering. The incidence of young adult homelessness in the LGBTQ plus community and BIPOC communities is much higher. Welcome to Westborough High School graduate Connor Schoen, co-founder of Breaktime, an organization dedicated to breaking the cycle of young adult youth homelessness. Connor is here today to talk to us about his work and his organization's work on their efforts to break this cycle. Connor, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today, Shelby.
Yeah, so Connor, a little bit, you're a familiar face to many, but certainly not to all here in Westborough. Would love if you could introduce yourself and tell us about your connection.
Yeah, so I spent my whole childhood and upbringing in Westborough, Mass. Grew up on McTaggart Street and went to Armstrong, went to Mill Pond, Gibbons, Westborough High School, the whole 9 yards. And that experience of growing up in Westborough is a huge reason why I'm able to do what I do today. You know, the quality of the education I got, but also just the encouragement that I always received from my peers and from my teachers to pursue public service as a career is something that always inspired me and motivated me to want to do what I'm doing today. So my upbringing in Westborough is so critical to who I am and everything I stand for. My brother still lives there. I'm there often and love that community. And I actually started Breaktime not too long after I left Westborough. After graduating from Westborough High School in 2017, I started at Harvard studying applied math. And within my second semester there is when I started Breaktime. Happy to go into more detail there, but just wanted to share that, you know, my upbringing in Westborough has been a critical piece of my whole story and the reason why I'm even here today.
Right. And I think that there's a bit of, I don't know that the right word is irony, but to your point about the opportunities that we're afforded, we have that, stable and robust, like home life, school experience, community experience, creates opportunities that, frankly, I think, we sort of take for granted because it's just our lived experience. But the youth you are working with and that your organization is dedicated to helping aren't as fortunate and for a number of reasons. And so tell us about how Breaktime started. How did you and Tony, your co-founder, find your...
Yeah, so I guess to tell that story, I'll rewind a little bit to a formative time of my childhood in Westborough. When I was in 5th grade, I believe it was the first time that I engaged in a public service opportunity. The Tohoku earthquake had happened in Japan, and the principal of Mill Pond at the time, Irene Hatherley, supported me in hosting a movie night to raise about $2,000 for earthquake victims in Japan. And I remember that experience so vividly because it was an example of a time where I had an idea and adult educators in Westborough's public school system fully supported me, fully backed me. They encouraged and fostered my love of service. And everything sort of just escalated from there. I started the Mill Pond Heralds, small student-run newspaper at Mill Pond, which Principal Hatherley also supported. And by the time I got to Gibbons, everything just continued to snowball with everyone around me continuing to motivate and support my love of service. When I was in 8th grade, I was selected to be an ambassador for Project 351, which is an incredible nonprofit that selects one 8th grader from every city and town in Massachusetts to do a year of service. And that experience allowed me to start the spring greening clothing drive here in Westborough, which is still going on today, and do a food drive every single fall with the support of a statewide team of amazing public servants who fostered my love of service and encouraged my leadership development as a young person. So all throughout my time in Westborough High School, I was deeply steeped in the world of nonprofits, the world of public service. I had a lot of exposure to public service leaders, had opportunities to be, chair of the Governor's Youth Council, understand sort of the governmental side of public service, but also learn a lot about the work in the nonprofit sector. And so by the time I got to Harvard, Westborough had already been fostering my love of community service for years and constantly encouraging me, constantly cultivating my talents and my interests. And I share that story because I think it's so important to why I'm here today. If you don't have that growing up, if you don't have folks who are encouraging your interests, who are cultivating your talents, it's extremely hard to get anywhere. And by the time you reach young adulthood and you're in that pivotal moment in your life where you're at this inflection point, starting your adulthood, trying to figure out your career, it can be very, very easy to feel lost because you've never had anyone guiding you or motivating you along the way. And so when I started at Harvard, I learned about this incredible youth-led shelter called Y2Y, which is right on campus. And it works with 18 to 24-year-olds experiencing homelessness. It had been started by Harvard students just a few years before I got onto campus. And I love this idea and this model of a youth-to-youth shelter that's focused on galvanizing the student body to support their peers experiencing homelessness in the community. And so I started working there almost right away when I got on campus. And really that experience is what made me feel so connected to all the experiences I'd had growing up in Westborough. In a way, Y2Y felt like home because it reminded me of what made me who I was and what made me so passionate, which was service. And that love and interest had been fostered back home in Westborough. And so as I was working at the Y2Y shelter with my co-founder, Tony Schoen, who's from Wellesley originally, we just started to see a gap in the system where the young people staying at the shelter had some supports with housing, but they didn't have the support they needed to sustain employment. And ultimately, we all know that having a job and building financial security for yourself is at the heart of having any semblance of housing security in the long term. And so I knew that the young people, my peers at the time, I was 19 years old, experiencing homelessness, needed more support when it came to obtaining and maintaining a job and building a career so that housing security was actually a possibility for the long term. I was in my own process of coming out at that time, something that I'd kind of grappled with throughout my life, but really fully confronted when I started working at the shelter because 40% of young people experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ+, according to the True Colors Fund. And so as I was working in the shelter where, half the folks around me essentially were LGBTQ+, I was sort of forced and encouraged to reckon with my own sexuality and identity. And that experience and that personal journey that I went through while working at Y2Y is a huge and continuing inspiration behind the work that I do. And so long history there of over a decade of sort of how I got to where I was when I started working at the shelter. But that's really all those experiences were at the forefront of why I was able to start Breaktime and the inspiration behind why I did it.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that in such colorful, kind of language and detail. If I had a word count on any word that you've shared in this intro, it would be support, 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 and encouragement. And I hope that resonates throughout this conversation with our viewers and listeners to understand kind of the principles and the foundations of what's so important to breaking the cycle and to the work of Breaktime. So let's get into a little bit of the content. As one of the things that I reached out to you and did some research, one of the things that I realized is that, this is just not a young adult homelessness in general, but young adult is just not a topic many people are comfortable with, they don't understand, and so it makes it difficult to talk about. And one of the things I love about the work that you guys are doing are your Misconception Mondays. And those talk a lot about kind of what are some of the misconceptions and it delves to or speaks to why do young adults become homeless. I was just wondering if you could kind of maybe set the stage with a couple of those misconceptions for our listeners.
Yeah, quickly building off what you said about support. First of all, I do want to give a huge shout out to my family, my parents, and my two brothers, Mark and Matt, who many in the Westborough community know, who all along my entire journey, my childhood, and now my journey with Breaktime, have been so supportive and have celebrated my love for service. And I think that's so special because, when I was starting Breaktime, and there was a lot of doubt about whether this could be a paid opportunity for me, how I was going to sustain myself. And my family knew this is what I loved and had always fostered my passion for service and gave me that space and gave me that support to be able to pursue this, along with loving me for who I am and for being the out and proud person I am today. And so my family, who, many of you know from my mom, who folks always see running around town, to my dad and my brothers, who have been around the Westborough community their whole lives. They're so central to this whole story. So just wanted to share that before I answered your question. In terms of misconceptions around young adult homelessness, the number one thing I would say is that young adult homelessness for 18 to 25-year-olds is very different than what we perceive as homelessness more broadly. Really, 99% of homelessness is what we call hidden homelessness. It's folks who are couch surfing, struggling to get by. They're doubled up with someone. They're not on the lease of an apartment. They're just, really struggling to hold on to housing. And the other 1%, the vast minority of cases, is street homelessness, where you see folks actively living on the street or maybe in shelters. But because that's the most visible side of the problem, it's how we think about the whole issue. And that's really hard for our young people, because folks experiencing chronic homelessness and living on the street have a different set of challenges that they're trying to overcome than our young people. Most of the young people I work with are homeless because they're transitioning out of the foster care system. They've never had really a stable support system. They've come out and gotten kicked out of their home. They have, they're sort of experiencing the cycle of intergenerational poverty and don't have the resources and support, like the resources and support I had from my family, to get to transition into adulthood. And so these young people have a different set of challenges than the average person experiencing chronic homelessness living on the street. So for folks in Westborough who might come into Boston and see one side of the homelessness crisis, we have to remember that 99% of the problem is what we're not seeing, and that the approach to addressing this challenge therefore has to be multifaceted, because it's not a monolithic issue. There's no one size fits all approach to addressing this challenge. So young people are experiencing homelessness for distinct reasons, and the challenge they're facing because of that homelessness is different than what we might see or perceive as the sort of the image that comes to mind when we think of homelessness.
Well, and there are some real barriers, and you've talked about a little bit about this, and I want to get into kind of the cycle work and the model of Breaktime here. I mean, homelessness is in this cycle. It's like, if you don't have a job, or it's like food, shelter, and then there's all the other, I'll call it, nice to haves, but which are so important in our social fabric and our connections. But when any of those break down, then there's a gap that needs to be filled. And one of the things that I love about Breaktime is this, this focus on, empowerment and education, and the ability, or helping and coaching your associates, which is what you call them. Some folks might wonder what an associate is, but client associate, is that, you're helping them to get jobs and helping them to create skills, and not just like tactical skills, but skills of your 6 E's and the importance of kind of these young adults. And but homelessness, I was thinking about this, it's like the first thing you do when you go out to fill out an application, whether it's for a fast food restaurant, or whether it's for your first office job, what's your address? If you can't start there, like, what do you do? And even if you're temporary on your friend's couch, do you get a post office? I mean, it's a very awkward starting point, and sometimes I guess a non-starter.
Yeah, I mean, uh, I think most of us have had the experience of moving away from home and switching addresses, and even that creates challenges of, oh, how do I get my mail? And oh, I still have stuff that goes to McTaggart Street in Westborough after years of not living there. And so when you don't have an address, when you don't have a stable address, when you're estranged from a family potentially that no longer supports you, not only is there not a place that you know where to get your mail, and it's really hard to figure that out and figure out what address to even put on a job application, but also at the same time, you probably don't have your birth certificate on hand, your social security card. We've also all probably had the experience of trying to get the real ID or even trying to get a passport and digging out those documents that we need and still getting it wrong. Those documents, I always say, there's like a shelf, there's a drawer in my parents' bedroom that seems to have all those important documents from over the years, and that's where I go to find them. But what if you're disconnected from your family? What if you don't live in that place anymore? What if you've moved 25 times in the last year? You don't have those documents. So even if you've spent your whole life growing up in this community, growing up in Massachusetts, you don't have the ability to get onboarded into a job because you don't have the right paperwork to fill out the federally required forms to get started. Sure. And so from the lack of a stable address to the lack of documentation, even just getting in the door in a job is a huge challenge. So this challenge has really informed why we do what we do at Breaktime, which is we actually hire young people experiencing homelessness onto our payroll to work at local nonprofits and small businesses. And I can talk more about the stages of that model, but and so the crux of it really is that we have the ability as the employer to work with the young person to make sure they can get the documentation they need to fill out the federally required forms, to use our address for folks to get mail. We do that very commonly. Use our address for folks to be able to put down as they're applying to other jobs. And so we have the ability to lean in and alleviate those barriers that there is to even getting a job in the first place, and then provide the support for folks to maintain employment and build a career. And the way we do that is our Breaktime's program has 3 parts. Breaktime starts with 3 weeks of workforce training and financial literacy, which is called Launchpad. Those 3 weeks are all about equipping folks with the skills they need to succeed in their job and in their life. We go through everything from how to deal with interpersonal conflicts in the workplace, to understanding your credit score and building credit, to understanding housing resources, really practical skills. I always say it's the kinds of things that we don't necessarily learn in school, but we really need in our life. And it's a 3-week sort of boot camp in those areas. We host those 3 weeks of trainings in a cohort-based model monthly at our office in Boston, but we're also bringing those trainings on the road to reach out to other communities in Massachusetts. The second part of our program, Liftoff, is 3 months of paid employment at a local nonprofit or small business. So whether it's a hospital, a community health center, a restaurant, a tech small business, no matter what the entity does, we hire young people to go work there in a field that's of interest to them. Breaktime's paying them every week. The job site is reimbursing us for half that cost. And so it's a shared investment in the success of that young person for those 3 months, getting into the workforce. And after those 3 months, folks can do what's called a temp to perm transition, which is where they go from being a temporary employee with us to being a permanent employee at that job site. They could, learn from that experience and decide that's not what they want to do, but they want to transition elsewhere. In many cases, they go and they start at college or a post-secondary institution and continue working part-time. No matter what they do, building off of that liftoff job placement, the whole point, as the name implies, is to really kind of catalyze their ability to launch a career and to really get rolling with the life that they envision for themselves. Finally, the third part of our program at Breaktime is called Stable Orbit, and it's 3 years of continued wraparound support. We provide $100 a month to continue to support our young people. They're receiving case management services from our young adult services team and doing monthly check-ins to make sure that we know how to best support them on an ongoing basis, because the job, financial, and housing security that they need to live their life and to thrive are not all going to be figured out in just a few months. It takes years, and we want to continue to be that support system for them. So ultimately, Breaktime's program model consists of Launchpad, the 3 weeks of training, Liftoff, the 3-month job placement, and then Stable Orbit, 3 years of continued support for our associates or for our young people.
Thank you so much for outlining the kind of key elements, the 3 components of Breaktime's model. Just the start of a conversation, and because there's so much here, I appreciate that you've agreed to kind of continue into a second segment. So for our viewers, thank you so much for joining in on the 01581 this week. We'll be hearing from Connor in a future episode, so stay tuned, follow our Facebook page for that future show. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.